Hi, welcome to the National British Choice Online News and welcome to the Stienberg Review. I'm Robin Stienberg and welcome to my show again. And today we have two wonderful guests who are here in Singapore in Southeast Asia who are making their visits to the Singapore Management University to address the issue on the arts business. And I have here Dr. Di Smith, who is the chair of the Arts Council of Wales, right here at the end. Hi, Dr. Di Smith.
Hello, Robin.
How's life?
It's terrific. I'm really enjoying Singapore.
Oh yeah, I hope your travel and your stay here has been a fruitful one.
Absolutely wonderful to be in Singapore.
And we have here at the center Dr. Chris Williams, who has just relaunched his book here in Singapore for the first time, the Richard Burton Diaries, and we're going to talk about this right away. Dr. Chris Williams, welcome to Singapore.
Thank you very much, Robin.
And thank God I'm not in New York. It's underwater, and now it's kind of like in the recovery stages. And many have said, it's so fortunate for someone like me to be in Singapore. Otherwise, we have to handle all the mess in our office. But talking about being pessimistic, let's move forward to optimism. Your book that has been released. Tell us more about it. I mean, you have taken a lot of challenge. Undertaking this wonderful life of Mr. Richard Burton himself, tell us the kind of challenges that you face in writing his book, based on his diaries, and also the part of the issue of censorship, because some of his contexts are quite sexually, erotic, I think, in nature. So tell us, how did you overcome it, and how the perception of the readers in the society at large are able to accept such content today? And also, Dr. Smith, please also on your part, we'd like to hear your endorsement of this book.
Well, to start off with the challenge of editing, I think that was largely a challenge of scale. The diaries in total run to almost 400,000 words, so it's a fairly big project to take on. Equally, they span a considerable part of Richard Burton's life. The first diary is a schoolboy diary kept in 1939-40. The last diary is kept in 1983. So you're dealing with different kinds of diary kept at different times in Richard's life. And you have to research the context of his life, who he was with, his family members, his friends, different film projects, theatrical projects he was involved with, reading that he was doing, and the references to literature that he weaves in and out of his prose. So it was really about developing a kind of editing system, how to approach this, how to organise oneself so that you could deal with the text fairly and consistently throughout, and of course equipping oneself with the knowledge, the background knowledge of Richard's life and times that enabled you to understand what he was writing about. So I guess from a scholar's point of view, there's a fair bit of understanding and scholarship which actually in a sense is concealed in the book, that the footnotes they're considerable, but they're not voluminous, and I would try to be reasonably restrained in terms of how much one provides evidence, or I certainly tended to refrain from footnoting the footnotes, as it were, so the scholarship is considerably concealed. In terms of censorship, there really wasn't very much censorship involved here. I think what you see in the printed version is about 75% of the total volume of the diaries, and that percentage was largely dictated by the publishers, who wanted to bring out a book of a certain length that could be sold at a particular price that they felt was appropriate for the market. So a lot of the work there was simply removing material that was repetitive or apparently inconsequential. In some cases it was unclear what Richard was writing about. So there just had to be a kind of editing process that went on after I'd finished editing the full text, and I decided, okay, well, we don't need that paragraph, we don't need that sentence here, we can compress the writing and tighten it up a bit. There's no rewriting involved, but there is excision. In terms of censorship, there was an agreement with Sally Burton, Richard's widow, that we, once the editing was over, we would provide Sally with a full copy of the book prior to publication. She would have an opportunity then to read it and to request the removal, the excision of passages of a sensitive nature that dealt with family members still living, if they were, if these passages did not contain information that was already in the public domain. We also had an agreement with Sally that she would show this material to Richard's daughter Kate, and so that we would treat Kate's views with respect also. So back in January of this year, the text was sent to both Sally and Kate, and they had 45 days to turn it around and come back to me with a list of things they wanted me to take out. There was then some discussion of what we were obliged to take out and what in fact we weren't obliged to take out, but ultimately probably about 1,000, 1,200 words were removed from the diaries for those reasons, and those words are not accessible to the public, not in the original diary form. You can't read those passages or those pages in the archives. One would guess that in the fullness of time, as people pass away, freedom of information legislation, so on in the UK, would mean that those passages will become available, but we're talking quite possibly 30 or 40 years down the line. It's my view as the editor that there's nothing in those passages that adds significantly or materially to our understanding or knowledge of Richard Burton or the people that he mentions. You know, these are passages really of a rather trivial nature, but I can understand that they might cause some distress and embarrassment to people who are alive today.
Amazing. And now, Dr. Smith, please tell us, what is your perception about this book now that's been released finally?
It's fantastic. I mean, you get, as Chris says, such an insight into the mind and the life of a great actor. But he's this big universal figure who's come out of South Wales, very ordinary working class family, and he becomes this big Hollywood star. And of course the marriage is to Liz Taylor. But it's his hometown, the hometown of Anthony Hopkins, and now Michael Sheen, that makes Burton, I think, in so many ways, such a representative figure for the world, of the part of the world that Chris and I come from, which is this very vibrant, very dynamic, industrial working class society. One, of course, which has now lost its industrialism and has lost, in some sense, the culture that created Burton. But Burton, I think, in these diaries lives again for us, and therefore his South Wales lives. And, of course, it's wonderful, it's gossip. There's a lot of fun in this. My God, I'm sitting down here reading what Richard Burton said about Elizabeth Taylor in 1972. Wow. And he's a really good writer. Burton's fantastic, and Chris has done a brilliant job in bringing, what in the end are the diaries, sometimes not terribly contemplative diaries. He's brought these diaries into this form, which is created. I mean, Chris has created, really, the book. So it's a creative act that the editor has undertaken. I congratulate him enormously, and we're very, very proud, that the book has come out of Swansea University.
Now, who financed this project, actually?
In terms of, well, I suppose you could say at one level, Swansea University financed it in that they asked me as a full-time member of staff to take this on, and they gave me a year's sabbatical at one point in the project to get on with the editing, and they provided some funding for research trips.
And when did you start writing this book?
Well, I started the work on the book in 2008.
Oh, 2008.
Yeah.
So Elizabeth Taylor was still alive back then.
Oh yeah, certainly. Yeah.
So was she aware about this project?
She was aware of it. At least her family were aware of it.
Okay.
Elizabeth Taylor was not very well in the last stages of her life.
Okay.
And I'm not sure whether she was directly informed, but her family certainly knew of it. Yeah.
I see. So how did they feel when they heard that this book was coming to reality, and she's been mentioned by her former husband?
Well, I understand that her children had concerns about it. They were not particularly enthusiastic about it, but of course they have lived their lives very much in the spotlight. They're used to biographers writing about their mother and journalists unpicking the details of their private lives. So I don't think this was anything out of the ordinary for them. And what was very, very valuable was that I built up a very good relationship with Richard's daughter Kate, who is a friend of the Taylor family, and who in fact, I think it was 2 years ago, spent Thanksgiving with Elizabeth Taylor and her family. And so I think Kate was able to reassure Elizabeth Taylor's children that the book was not in any way going to be sensationalist. It was not going to cause Elizabeth or her children any distress, and that actually what we were doing was giving a kind of respectful life to a very important phase of Elizabeth's life as well as of Richard. And of course she is a major presence in the diaries, and I think she comes out of the diaries very, very well.
Yeah, at the heart of it's a love story, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Now, speaking about the love story, Dr. Smith, tell me right now, now that this book is now made available worldwide for the first time, about the town where Mr. Burton was born.
Yeah.
Is it now become a tourist attraction?
Oh, well, I think it would like to be. It's a former steel town on the edge of the coalfield. It's a town with quite serious problems of unemployment. It's not a beautiful place in that sense, but it's got a heart, it's got a soul. And because of this great tradition, as I said, Michael Sheen now, Hopkinsburton, it really does have a kind of a big ring about it. And National Theatre Wales, which is the English language company, which I'm sure Burton would have been extremely proud of, took the town over for a whole weekend last year, and Michael Sheen did a kind of a community play that worked through the town. Hundreds of thousands of people came. It was on Sky News, live feed every day, the play. And when I say play, it was happening in the streets, it was happening in working men's clubs, it was happening on the beach at Port Talbot, the town's called Port Talbot, and it got front page news in the New York Times. So yeah, maybe a tourist attraction. Why not? And if that's the case, then they'll get even more of the diaries.
Any consideration that the Arts Council of Wales would consider funding a tourist attraction program for visitors around the world to visit places where Burton was born, Anthony Hopkins was born, and so forth?
Perhaps I could say on that we did launches in the US a couple of weeks ago, and the Welsh Government, through Visit Wales, the tourist organisation, promotion of Wales overseas, played a major role in organising and financing those launch events.
Wow.
So I think there has been an awareness through that channel that Richard Burton and his story has the potential to attract certainly visitors from North America to Wales. And also today, actually, in about 8 hours' time, in Port Talbot, they will be launching the Port Talbot Richard Burton Trail, which has been designed by children at the school that Richard went to, and it ties together different locations in Port Talbot associated with Richard's life.
Mine, I think you're going, Professor Willis, I think you're going to have a very busy time signing more books in the coming months. Really. Now, back to Dr. Smith. Tell us right now about Wales. Wales is such a booming, country right now because of the fact that you have, a very well-known and established artists in their own field in theater and film. What kind of plans is your council going to do for the next 5 years, in terms of promoting the arts and building the arts culture, and how your program has able to be seen as a model for countries like Singapore, Malaysia, and other emerging economies?
That's really interesting, Robin, and that is why I think the conference we've had here at Singapore Management University has been so useful in exchanging information between two countries which you might say were very different, but they have a lot in common. Singapore, about 5 million people, Wales, about 3 million people. We have more land mass, more people spread out, of course. But we also have two languages, so we have a bilingual society, you have a multilingual society. We have a very ancient culture in the Welsh language, very long, thousands of years. And in English, of course, as you say, we have an industrial, if you like, Americanized culture as well. But we're both, Singapore and Wales, caught up in this kind of global uniformity, which we embrace because I suppose it brings us material and economic rewards. But what is our identity? What is our soul? How do you root the soul of Singapore? How do you root the soul of Wales? And our answer would be through song, through dance, through theatre, through opera, through visual arts, through through history and heritage. We grasp a sense of the things about us that make us not so much totally different, but make us unique. So I tell you my story, you tell me yours. And what we have, I think, is an opportunity in Wales now with a Welsh government for the first time since 1999 to express the artistic and cultural identity of Wales. So my Arts Council has a lot of money from the government, about the same actually as the Arts Council in Singapore, by the way, to spread amongst our organizations. So we have created theatres, national dance, opera, as I say, art galleries, as you have here. I think one of the big differences is you have a wealthier society that has created an infrastructure for the arts, the Esplanade, the theatres, the art galleries that you've managed here in the last few years. But maybe you don't have so much the arts administrators, the facilitators, maybe not so much the arts content to fill them with Singaporean sense. In Wales, maybe it's the other way around. We've got a lot of content, but maybe we need a kind of a showcase, a shop window.
The infrastructure, that is. Yes.
Yeah, so maybe we need to exchange more.
Yes, and one thing rich about Wales, in Europe, is that you have created a sense of identity. You have created a sense of the reflection of heritage. So you spoke the other day about what is culture and heritage. Could you give us that insight again? Because I think many of our viewers do not want to wish to miss that point.
Yeah.
Tell us more about what is culture, and what is culture for you, for both of you, and heritage.
Well, we're both historians originally, and I think heritage, and our minister in Wales, called the Minister for Heritage, is of course really important. So in Wales, we were invaded. We've got castles. We have a rich history. My argument is that the culture, the arts, if you want, that came out of this, is the creative catalyst. And heritage is one thing, but creativity and going on to the future is what you make of it. In other words, heritage is a good legacy, but it's creativity that comes before heritage that created the heritage. So what's the new heritage? What's the new Wales? What's the new expression? How do we give the children, Chris has just said, they have the Richard Burton Trail, the children, how do we give them the memory of where they've come from? But also, how do we make new Richard Burtons? Because I'm sure Michael Sheen, growing up in Port Talbot, had the memory of Richard Burton and of Anthony Hopkins somewhere, and that probably has made him the world-famous actor he is today.
So what is culture? How can Asia develop culture? Because Singapore is trying to ask themselves, what is a Singaporean? See, or what is a Malaysian? Everybody's asking themselves, because in this part of the world, the emerging economies, they are new. They're only like less than 50 years.
Yeah.
A far cry than Wales and England, where you have centuries of history. So could you share with us, how can one able to find identity in themselves?
Well, I suppose my starting point would be to, as Di says, not to accept the idea of heritage as somehow fixed and simply transferable from one generation to the next, but instead to recognise that the past offers us the clues to our present and future identity, as long as we treat it with appropriate respect, as long as we are prepared to interrogate and debate the past. So, as a historian, I think that our heritage is really important, but that it's a very complex heritage. The heritage of Wales, the situation of, shall we say, of the Welsh language, or of the relationship of the Welsh people to England, or of Welsh people to the British state, the issues of class, the rise of the labour movement, political democracy in Wales. All of these things are still debated and discussed by historians, and that is entirely as it should be. And as long as our dialogue with the past remains a live dialogue, then I think that offers us channels into the future. So I don't know very much, I would confess, about the history of Singapore, although I actually did study Southeast Asian history at university for a short while. I'm aware that it is a past which has many levels of conflict, of intersections, of different power interests and power blocks. There's obviously a great deal of ethnic and linguistic diversity. And my suggestion would be that in looking for what is identity and culture, that one doesn't seek to erase any of that, but to work with it and to channel it in the most positive ways that one can.
I think if I was a young Singaporean novelist beginning to look for my subject, I would begin by asking why we're asking these questions and what is this interrelationship between Singapore and the world. I think I would set the first chapter of my novel in Changi Airport. And, when the world meets Singapore, Singapore meets the world, and you have these.
That should be your first book.
Okay, my second chapter would be him imagining a young Welshman coming to Singapore, let's say in 1900 or 1912, with a ship full of coal. Because to coal to Singapore and then the breakup of the British Empire. My third chapter, I don't know, maybe we'd get into the conflict. Then I'd have a love story. But, but you have all of the elements of the things that make Singapore very exciting for the world. So I don't think Singapore should be worrying about what its identity is. It should be saying our history is fluid. We are a river. We're not a still lake. We are a river through which many things flow. So celebrate that. Celebrate the difficulties.
Yes. Now, speaking about difficulties, Southeast Asia is having a problem in trying to handle the term censorship in artistic works, such as paintings, film, literary arts. And so recently, you may have heard that there's some rumors and reports from Singapore even that there were films that were made by local filmmakers and they were banned by their own country, like Singapore, just because they don't like the content. What advice would you give, to policymakers to change their minds and their views towards censorship in the arts? Because I know that in Europe you don't do much censorship. Even I spoke to the CEO of the Edinburgh Festival.
Sure.
Recently he was on my show, and he said we don't do censorship.
No.
So tell us, what sort of advice would you give?
I think to begin with, you would need to become more confident about your ability as a society to handle these very divergent views and opinions on sexuality, ethnicity, and even, if I may say, politics. And that maybe is something that will take time to develop. I think what I would say, and what I've been hearing in Singapore, not in favour of censorship, but sometimes why censorship has arisen. You can easily give offence, particularly if you have very divergent religious or faith groups. And even in Britain, we are quite careful, and more careful now, about giving offensive remarks. But that said, we come from societies that are very liberal, and I think if you want that sense of arts that are going to grow, then you have to be strong enough to say, okay, you've said these things, I don't agree with you, I'd like to discuss them with you, but I'm not going to stop you saying it. And it's Voltaire, the 18th century French philosopher, who says, I don't agree with what you say, but I will die to give you the right to say it. That's a big, strong European tradition, American tradition. I think it's a very powerful tradition. I believe in it, and I do not believe in censorship, but I do accept that different societies are dealing with these things in different ways.
Well, and I'd like to ask, right now, Professor Williams, what sort of challenges right now Wales is facing as a society? You're growing, you're established, and what sort of challenges do the artists over in Wales are still facing? Are they still facing the issue of trying to export the artistic content? And also, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it true right now that in Europe there is more supply than demand in terms of content.
Well, I'd just say two things that I know a little bit about in relation to the question you've asked. I think one huge challenge for Wales is that I think we are very rich creatively, artistically. There's enormous potential, a tremendous history there, and no reason to doubt that we can't continue to be that in the future. Economically, Wales is not in good shape. It has fallen behind other regions of the United Kingdom in terms of gross domestic product over the last 20 years. It is one of the poorest regions of the United Kingdom. It is getting increasingly impoverished in relation to the key economic areas of Western Europe. We have high levels of economic inactivity. There are former mining communities, industrial communities with very high levels of unemployment, of people on sickness benefit. There are major social problems. For all of Wales's creativity, that has been the story of Wales really over the last 30 years. And at the moment, the indicators are not very good for the immediate future. So that's something that worries me quite considerably, is how do we address that problem? Because we haven't been very successful at addressing it in my generation. The second thing I would say, and I speak not really as someone who knows a tremendous amount, frankly, about the kind of bodies that Di deals with through the Arts Council of Wales, but in terms of historians, and I know a bit about historians, I think the challenge we've got as historians is that Wales is a kind of new nation, post-devolution. Since 1999 we've had the Welsh Assembly, it's acquired greater powers. There is a strong sense of making things new in Wales. I think the challenge for historians is to, in a sense, be critics of that process at the same time as working with it, that we shouldn't simply fall into the rhetoric of nation building, because I think that closes down proper intellectual debate about our past and therefore about our future. So I think we've got to remain very vigilant. The Welsh government, the Welsh Assembly is a very powerful presence now in Wales. Politics of Wales are such that it's likely to be dominated by one particular political party. That's a political party that personally I'm a member of, I'm a supporter of their broader ideals, but at the same time I think we do need to retain scope for greater political and intellectual debate than sometimes is being encouraged.
So when you become a senator, please let me know.
So that party, which is the Labour Party, which of course operates across the United Kingdom, would certainly look to see its kind of progressive politics uniting the different countries of the United Kingdom. And on that basis, Wales would stay part of the UK. On the upbeat, everything Chris says is correct, but on the upbeat, Cardiff is now a real European city for the first time. Very vibrant, lots of good restaurants, nice place to come and visit.
For Asians to come.
For Asians to come, very, very welcome indeed. And we do have a government within Wales that is to making Wales a showcase, a shop window in terms of its cultural activities, sporting activities. The Wales rugby team are going to win the next World Cup, by the way, and so we're going to do all of those things. And I think, really, in the eyes of the world, if you say Scotland, they think, okay, whiskey, maybe Sean Connery, they know. You say Ireland, and people who know the literature know that, and
Bono.
And Bono. So you say Wales, it's not so clear, which is why this book is so important.
Oh yes.
Because you say Wales, and people say Richard Burton. And when I was a student in America, in the 1960s, the only things they knew about Wales were Richard Burton. And Richard Burton, and now they know Tom Jones, and the Manic Street Preachers, and Shirley Bassey, and Bryn Terrell, the opera singer. But, and I think it's a really, really important thing, we have this, as Chris says, this rich, rich creativity, which we have not managed to sell to the rest of the world. And that's where business comes in, because we're in the business of the arts as well as in the art of business.
Now, what kind of plans does your council have in place right now, as well as safety nets for the next 5 years? Do you see Wales able to partner with countries like Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, to bring in and promote Wales culture?
Absolutely, I hope so. I mean, we have an organisation which is connected to the Arts Council called Wales Arts International, which takes Welsh artists abroad. So, for example, we've been into India, we've worked with Tamil poets, we've taken Welsh language poets to work with Tamil poets who translated. National Theatre Wales is going to Tokyo to work with National Theatre Japan next year. We have incoming companies, the Kirov come, we have other opera companies, other theatres and artists. So we're very, very open. And you see, here's Wales, here's England. To get to Europe, to get to Asia, we have to jump over England, because otherwise Big Brother England shuts us up. They don't censor us, there are more of them and they have more money. So we have to be smarter, quicker, wittier, cleverer, and you can clearly see we're better looking. So that's what we've got to do.
And better women too.
Absolutely.
Kip Singh might say that. I couldn't comment.
Now, about the business of the arts, how did your wonderful country Wales manage to overcome all the odds in the business in this kind of business? Because business in the arts can be very lucrative, and it can be very challenging, because there's plenty of content out there in Europe as well, and also in North America. So what were the steps and the types of a program did you take to challenge?
Robin, I think that goes back to your question about Singapore and identity and the expression of people. We use the word soul. Maybe that's too strong a word, but it's right. I mean, I think we've had these great talented artists in many ways, painters. We haven't even talked about musicians. They haven't always been given the opportunities to do their work in Wales and to express and articulate and be that soul within Wales. So what the Arts Council does, I think, is to ensure that his career or your career or whoever, kids can sustain their art, can work within Wales, so that we have art galleries where the work can be shown. We bring Artes Mundi, the art of the world, is a big art exhibition. It comes to Wales every 2 years, brings conceptual art, very contemporary art. And I was at the opening of your new Contemporary Art Gallery last night here in Singapore. Bring that art into Wales, and we give the world's biggest monetary prize, and it goes to Mexicans, Israelis, South Americans. It's not a Welsh thing. And we go to Venice with Welsh art, at the Venice Biennale every 2 years. So we are